Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Shaken Not Burned. As we're coming closer to this year's annual climate negotiations, taking place this November in Azerbaijan, it's important to talk about what we need to see on the table. There is always a good deal of controversy around what should take priority and how we should address the challenges we face. But at a time when we're struggling with so many different issues, from extreme weather and stable supply chains and pollution, nature and the loss of biodiversity, economic pain and even growing conflict, it's important to discuss what we need to see on the table. Even more, we need to start identifying solutions that help to address multiple problems. We need to think about which systems are connected. One option is to look more closely at agriculture and the role it plays in emissions and health and the food system. And of course, one of my favourite topics, what underlies agriculture, soil. It can be seen as the missing link between climate and nature. Agriculture as an industry is one of the worst offenders in emissions terms after the energy sector, yet there's no doubt we need food, good, nutritious food. Agriculture has to work for the planet. Today, we're lucky enough to be joined by Praveena, who is the Chief Scientist and Technology Officer at Conscious Planet. Welcome, Praveena. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about Conscious Planet and what you do.
At Conscious Planet, we have an ecological movement called the Safe Soil Movement. I come from there. And this movement is based on Conscious Planet's initiatives in India, which have been working with farmers over 25 years, trying to understand how to build farmer livelihoods in a way that it's also ecologically sensible. Yeah. And this experience of us working with farmers, like right now we have worked with over 220,000 farmers who have adopted tree-based agriculture, and we have trained over 30,000 odd farmers in regenerative agriculture practices, and I think a whole lot more farmers in tree-based agriculture also trainings. Right. So from this experience, we have been able to push for policy change at the national level in India through an initiative called Rally for Rivers, which was again started by Sadhguru in 2017, in which we asked people, citizens of India, to voice for the rivers, which can be brought back to life if people adopted tree-based agriculture in the river basin, part of their lands at least on tree-based agriculture. It was supported by over 192 million people then. Since then, we've been working with some river rejuvenation, and as an offshoot, as a global offshoot of all the learnings we've done in India, the Safe Soil journey was started in 2022 in which Sadhguru, who's 65 then, rode 30,000 kilometers on a motorcycle through snow and deserts of 50 degrees Celsius to just build awareness among people on the states of soil across the world. And the movement's vision is to bring back 3 to 6% of organic matter in agriculture lands. And the way we want to be achieved is three-pronged. The first one being seeking governments to incentivize farmers to do the right thing on the land and build health and life into soil. Second is there's a huge pot of climate finance that's there, which is being used for alternative energy purposes, which is not really accessible to farmers. We are seeking that to become accessible to farmers in an easy manner. Third is you and me, as customers or people who eat food to live, should be willing to pay a little more when food comes from soils which are managed sustainably, responsibly, and building health and life into it. So this is the movement. And since 2022, through the awareness campaign, we have reached over 4.1 billion people or more in taking the message to them about the state of soils. We have quite a number of people who are earth buddies who are doing various activities to build awareness across cities through events walks in the park, moving museums, and a whole lot of things. And we are also working with governments to facilitate policy changes which ensure soils are alive across. We have collaborated with the European Union on the soil monitoring directive. We work with Indian government very closely. We are working with some of the Central Asian countries, and we are also trying to work with the Caribbean nations. So that's what we do as a movement.
Now, there was a declaration at COP28 in Dubai about prioritising resilient food systems with climate action, basically recognising the profound potential of agriculture and the food systems to drive change, both in response to climate change and to unlock prosperity. Now, that means that with the coming COP29 conference in Azerbaijan, there's a huge focus on climate finance, but particularly in bringing agriculture into that element of work. I know in June, the UN World Food Programme, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and both the COP28 and COP29 presidencies called for an urgent scaling up of climate action and financing for adapted and resilient agri-food systems, especially in fragile and conflict-affected settings. So why is finance for shifting the way agriculture works so important?
I think agriculture should be a big priority at this COP. Second, over 2.5 billion people are directly or indirectly dependent on agriculture as livelihoods. And of the people who are farming, around 80% of them are small and marginal farmers. And I think if finance were to be made available, any instruments were to be made available, it should be made available to the vulnerable population to strengthen them and make them less vulnerable, right? So therefore, I think climate finance has to turn towards agriculture because of this. And one more point, soils, most conservatively calculated, can actually sequester up to 27% of what is needed for us to be able to realize the 2% goal, or not get there rather. To not get to the 2%, soils can actually absorb 27%, agriculture soils alone.
That's incredible, because that's basically, I mean, it's arguable that if that's the case, that we're not actually going to be able to solve the climate challenge unless we address soil.
Perfect argument. I agree with you. It's quarter of the piece of the puzzle, right? Like if this quarter is not realized, you will not be able to realize that 2%, come what may. Because this 2%, this agriculture doesn't stop at the 27%, because people do not know how to farm well. Like if you see the recent case of forest fires in Brazil, there are multiple reasons to it: droughts, El Nino, it's a season of dryness, all of it. But Amazon has never had the history of catching fires. Why is it happening now? That's because people have been in desperation. Agriculture is a very desperate profession. It's the most unsecure. There is no security net for most people across the world. Maybe some farmers in the developed world have some, direct payments and buybacks, like the cap allows for it in Europe, but it's not the case across the world. So in desperation to be able to meet their livelihood, people are slashing and burning the forest. And when they're slashing and burning, and if it happens to be in these seasons, it kind of catches fire. So I'm oversimplifying this whole scenario, right? I'm oversimplifying, I'm aware of it. But that this connection is not something we can deny. There are multiple reasons, but this connection is still a very strong connection. So if we do not agriculturalist farmers, scenarios by helping them build their soil health and life back, you're never going to be able to realize climate. Like they will contribute through kind of making the soil an emitter, and they will also eat up the forest, which was the sequesterer.
That makes sense. So what we're really talking about is the damage that land degradation does on a much wider scale. Can you talk me through sort of the nature of land degradation and its causes and how it works, I guess?
It's very interesting. You just need to Google land degradation. You don't need to be a scientist. You don't need to be a science person. You just Google land degradation and look up the top results that generative AI gives you. It's 18 of them. Of the 18, there is one which is not under control of human beings. Every other element is anthropogenic. Every bit of land degradation, causation of land degradation, points towards us human beings, like misuse of fertilizers or injudicious use of fertilizers, not knowing how much to put, trying to get better yields just by thinking you put more, therefore you'll get better yields, farmers, right? And then you use various kind of chemicals to ensure that you don't lose your crop, right? And then that eventually leads to soil degradation, therefore land degradation, right? Land is a bigger concept. Land is composite of soil and other things, right? And then because I'm a farmer and I'm only guaranteed buyback from my government on certain produce, not all produce, therefore I want to only grow that. So it's monocropping, right? There is a buyback on corn, but there is not a buyback on some millet that grows only specifically in my region. Then why will I grow that millet? I don't know. What am I going to realize? Already my livelihood is, in shoestring budget or sometimes going in the negatives. So all the reasons for land degradation is anthropogenic, and most of the land degradation is mooted in agricultural lands.
Yeah. Now, I remember when we met last year, we were talking about a particular project. I don't know if you remember, we were talking about the difference between the health of the land and its resilience when, good farming techniques were used, because it was a mixture of crops and plants and trees and grazing and all sorts of different things. And it seemed to have a greater ability to hold water when there was flooding. Can you talk to me about the sort of resilience element of healthy soils?
All this while we were talking about how degraded soils happen and what degradation look like, right? At the same time, it's so, I would say, Mother Earth is so generous. Like, you have been exploiting her all this while, suddenly you start doing the right thing, she bounces back in no time. So there are farms, like if you see in Latin America, I'm not sure which country or which particular book I read in, there is an idea of three sisters. Three different kind of crops are grown at the same time because all of them grow at different paces, and they need different levels of sunlight. Farming in all, if you one had to summarize farming in a nutshell, it's just sun harvesting. 80% sun harvesting with the support of whatever things are on the ground. The 20% is soil and maybe few other things in the air, right? Carbon dioxide and other things. So for this to happen, so every plant has different kinds of harvesting potential. So ancestrally, people used to do three layer crops, or five layer crops, or seven layer crops. We have farms in India that we have worked with, farmers, which are seven layers. And the farmer earns through the year like a salaried individual like you and me. So what happens when you have seven crops? So the land is getting various root systems at different depths, first of all. So the soil structure is beginning to build. There is a whole lot of microbial activity that happens on the ground. Right now, let's say we are beginning with a soil which has no microbial activity, let's say desertified soil. You can bring back the microbial activity by very simple methods of just introducing the bovine, inoculum from the region, which is native to that region. We get the soil kick started. And after that, you see the trees, the plants, the crops start building the soil structure. When soil structure gets formed, it's like a very intelligent foam. Like if there is drought, the foam has held some amount of water from previous time because it was so porous and so, and the depth of the foam is increased because of the root systems. You say most of the cropping, all of us depend on the first 12 inches of soil. Okay, that 12 inches is what sustains all of humanity. This 12 inches can actually grow bigger if the number of crops and the variety of crops that you grow on it increases, thus increasing the porosity or making a soil a very intelligent foam. So during the floods, this foam drinks up as much water as it can. The foam's ability to drink water increases drastically with the diversity that's grown on it. And the foam also starts releasing water during the drought because it has enough for the plants to be kept alive at least through the drought period. So that this way the soil actually builds a whole lot of resilience when it is healthy and alive. And health and life of soil is built by plant and animal litter, very simply put. And the plant and animal litter comes from and has to be diverse. And this diversity is introduced by crop rotation or multi-layered cropping, or bringing in trees, or ensuring that the land is not exposed to harsh weather like sun, harsh snow. So that's how resilience is built.
So one of the things that's fascinating in that is this notion of the different styles of farming that happen in different regions. Is that why it's important for policy to be context specific? And what would that look like? What sort of policies are you looking for at this year's COP?
So, first of all, there are two parts to this question: contextual policies. Second is expectation of the policies at this COP. Right? The contextualization in our ramp up to the movement, we have cataloged over 700 plus unique practices. The number of practices we have cataloged is way more across various agroecological zones across countries. Yeah. So let's say United States, which is a big country, it has five agroecological zones, five or four agroecological zones. China will have again similarly big set of. India has three. So when you document ancestral practices, you see what is preferred by farmers, what is traditionally known to farmers. So policies have to be contextual in this respect, respecting traditions and acknowledging traditions. And it's also something people can pick up easily because they have been doing it for generations together, right? So that's one context. The second context is, what's the level of development of the nation per capita income, to put it simply, right? When it comes to America, we can expect American farmers to do certain things because we can expect the government of United States to be able to compensate well enough because they're a well-off government. Whereas in African government, usually they are also not able to pay farmers to use enough fertilizers. There are countries who are not utilizing fertilizers, therefore soil is being mined. Whatever is in soil, it's depleting at a faster pace because enough inorganic fertilizer is also not available. So we are looking at two different the ends of the paradigm, right? So the policy has to be contextual with respect to the economy, with respect to the state of farmers, large farmers, small farmers, marginal farmers, and the kind of cropping traditions that has existed. That's where context becomes very important. Like if you look at CAP, Common Agriculture Program of the European Union, yeah, it's quite good, I would say. Like the most recent version of it looks at people adopting ecologically sensitive practices from point of delivery of the program, third year or fourth year, they should have gone, or certain percentage of practices should be mandated, right? That's a very good level of progress, right? Similarly, you have the soil monitoring directive coming in to facilitate that adoption by monitoring what's happening to soil health, right? So this is, if one were to visualize it, it's a ladder. Policy making is a ladder where different people are at different levels of actualization, right? The European Americans or many other developed nations can be at a certain level. The people who are the African nations, which are largely agriculture dependent, but still don't have funds, are at certain levels. So, coming back, the next question, the second part of the question, climate finance. So, this year's COP is climate finance. That's the theme of the COP, the UNFCCC COP at Azerbaijan, right? It becomes very important at this COP that agriculture becomes a priority because majority of the small and marginal farmers across the world live in countries that are lower or middle income countries. And these countries by themselves do not have the ability to pay up for the farmers to do the right thing on the land. So the climate finance pot, which is so big, 27 percentage of it should be available for farming, right? Because 27 percentage of the sequestration potential lies with soil. Right now, it's not even few percentages. So, whatever the 27 percentage, or let's say we are working towards the 27 percentage, that can actually facilitate behavior change in those countries which are lower and middle income, and they cannot really incentivize behavior change by themselves from their own budgets. So, that will be the priority at this particular COP, making carbon and climate finance accessible for small and marginal farmers of the world.
And I suppose in many ways, by making that finance accessible for the marginal and small farmers, you're actually addressing many of the problems that not problems, but issues that go far beyond carbon sequestration around healthy food and around the stability of food systems and human health. How can we get that climate finance to move towards farming, towards that 27% of sequestration? How do we actually unlock finance for land regeneration?
One basic problem that exists with carbon finance or climate finance is that it was designed for cap and trade for industries in Europe to begin with. So it's extremely structured, and it is not the kind of paperwork and things needed. A farmer can never do it. So that process has to be simplified. And the way they measure, so there is something called as permanence. You have to establish that the sequestration is permanent for you to be able to be paid for it. Whereas, given if you look at evapotranspiration or soil, what do you call it? Oxidation, like respiration map, it's sinusoidal, depending on crops. Yeah, it's like a sine theta, sine curve, or cos curve, right? So it's that's because it's a dynamic system. You're growing crops, you're removing crops, you're growing crops.
Oh, and a dynamic system doesn't work in the permanence required to set a credit for it.
No, there is some amount of permanence that can be established. Even in the because your behavior is changing, you're slowly beginning to add to the carbon in the soil rather than withdraw it all the time. That's there. But people want it to be extremely accurate rather than having requesting or needing for farmers to have establishing in a very accurate manner what has been sequestered. You need to come up with protocols which discount for the dynamism of the soil and pay up for the bare minimum permanence at least. You can at least do that, right? The entire world is now trying to map the soil carbon. Most of the companies who are into mapping and otherwise are trying to map it, but they are not yet cracked it. Once that comes into place, this system will become easier, right? This is one mechanism. There can be other mechanisms, like people can actually take loans in one of the southern states of India by pledging their trees that are on their land.
They're trees.
Yeah, trees are assets, right? Like, especially timber trees are huge assets. So, why not look at it like my house? Why not look at it like my car so that I can pledge and take money? That's a nice instrument, right? And most importantly, this whatever is being done on land, agriculture lands, eventually is common good, isn't it? It's not just for the farmer. It adds to common good, better quality of air, better quality of water, better biodiversity, like, robust ecosystem. The food security is improving because you are kind of building resilience into that. So there's a whole lot of common good that comes out of it. Like FAO had the ecosystem benefit services payout system that was developed, but it's not yet rolled out. If you look at it, the carbon finance ecosystem is so complicated. I don't know when will the biodiversity ecosystems payouts will happen. So it's prerogatory of the governments to pay up public finance, because I was just reading every year EU spends over $50 billion on degraded, paying up for the soil and land degradation. This is one side, right? Every year, EU is spending $50 billion to pay up for the degradation. Whereas there is another stat from World Resource Institute. For every dollar you invest in restoration, you create $7 to $30 of economic benefits for the locals, and on top of it you also end up doing all the other you know common good provisions for the people, rest of the people, not just the people in the land. So if you don't spend, you're going to bleed more money on restoration. If you spend, you're actually building communities, strengthening communities. So it's a very simple logic, but somehow it doesn't make sense for governments to do it, because I think farmers are retail customers, they're not wholesale customers. So it becomes very difficult for them to roll these things out. Like if you see the crop insurance ecosystem, the way it's developed over the period, it took a long time for it to come to be, because they never knew who to trust to pay out the insurance. So it's like it's taking a lot of time. But the problem with soil and land degradation is that if you do not take action now, it's going to cost you 10 times, 100 times, 5 years from now or 10 years from now. So it's better the governments muster the courage and come to a place, realize the importance of putting the money, even if it were for pro bono, to get the right things happen on the land.
It's especially interesting, this thing of time horizons, that, when you were saying that if you don't work on soil now, it'll cost you 10 to 100 times more in 5 years' time. I think the thing that's so difficult to get governments to understand, and I say governments for lack of a better phrase because I think it's a much wider issue, is this idea that we are traveling in a certain direction that is negative, and that we need to arrest the degradation and do things in a different way so we don't have to spend even more in 10 years' time. It's well known that the addition of lots of different fertilizers and pesticides and goodness knows what may improve short term your crop growth and therefore your financial return. But the runoff goes into the water system. It can cause algal blooms. Then you've got knock-on effects within. It almost feels like soil is one of the things that lies at the heart of a number of different systems. And if we don't care for it, we're actually creating problems for ourselves that will be incredibly dangerous and incredibly expensive.
Like, given the important role that soil plays, like the axis around which all the ecosystem revolves, like given that if you don't work on that, then everything is going to just fall apart. I'm not here to make doomsday statements. We are working with a whole lot of farmers whose lives have been turned around. We're seeing a lot of policy changes that happening at the India level. There's a huge push for reduced usage of fertilizer, pesticides, and support for adopting methods that are regenerative. It's happening, but it has to happen at a quicker pace, because if we don't pick up the pace now, the costs involved from the governments will be high. Let aside cost, okay, what we are going to be seeing is large scale migration. If the land's degraded completely, where are people going to go? There any According to people who are living in degraded lands, they might think, anyway, my life is very poor in quality. Let me try out something else. And where will they try out? They move to urban areas. What will happen? Who's in the urban areas? You and me. If the urban areas get crowded, what's going to happen? There's going to be fight on common good, water, electricity, food, everything. And the food producer has chosen to not produce food and move to the city to become a cab driver. Where are you going to get your food from? So it's really important. The ramifications don't stop at food, water, biodiversity. They go to peace of the society. They kind of hit at the fundamental core of civilized existence. Where will we be civilized? If, let's say, I have to feed my child and I don't have a piece of bread, also, I will fight for that. I will lose all civility. I'm not going to come and plead. I'll just go steal. That's where it'll go, isn't it? So the cost of not working on soil right now won't just stop at costing governments more in terms of money. It's gonna cost far more, and it's gonna cost lives eventually.
This is such an interesting conversation because I think one of the things that's coming up more and more at the moment when looking at climate finance and projects and investment is the importance of identifying the co-benefits of particular actions. But there's no way of putting a price on, civil society or peace. And, ethically and philosophically, there shouldn't be a price on these things. But at the same time, if we're trying to drive finance from governments and maybe even the private sector, because there's got to be a role for insurance in all of this, we need to find a way of quantifying these impacts and how we can say, you have to make investment decisions as a government, as a sovereign fund, as a long-term pension fund, whatever it might be, in order to find ways of increasing stability in society and increasing nature and biodiversity, or at the very least protecting what we've got, and finding new ways of building out those healthy ecosystems. And it does sound to me, listening to you, that soil is one of those really obvious first places to start, especially the fact that you're talking about marginal farmers in countries that are usually most at risk of climate change. You're actually talking about things that help not only their financial situation, but as you say, their communities and the land around them. So that seems to be an investment with multiple benefits that are communal. So it seems like a no-brainer that climate finance should go towards that. But it's very difficult because financiers tend to work on cost benefit.
Maybe we should start looking at it differently. Like, this is something I've been trying to break my head on for the last 4 years. How do I quantify the amount of carbon that's gone into the land and what's happening to the trees, quantify biodiversity? Why should we quantify the benefits? Why do we not see that? What have we stopped from happening? Like, we are almost drawing a boundary from where you cannot, we are almost building a wall on the cliff, like wall at the cliff rather, so that nobody falls off the cliff. That's what this whole effort is, right? There's a cliff and everybody's rushing towards it. There's a good enough wall that will take every human being rushing to it and still not break. That's what we are building here. We should be looking at rather than having to quantify. See, nobody quantified what are the ill effects of fertilizers before they sold it. Sorry, not fertilizers. I would say it's okay for fertilizers to be used. Honestly, there is nothing we as a movement have against fertilizers or any of the chemicals, because as long as it's used judiciously, as long as it's used with being informed what is the amount required for a crop. Because soils, let's say if you begin to build them up right now, it's not going to build up in a day. It's going to take few years. Until then, you need the support system, right? So financiers asking to quantify the benefits, I would want to turn around the question: why should we quantify the benefits rather than saying what are the costs that we have stopped from you having to incur it, right? Because we cannot quantify, we don't understand nature, we don't understand a percentage of soil. We might quantify something, we may put a price tag to that, but definitely whatever price tag we put to whatever services soil, water, biodiversity provides will be far below than what we'll ever realize or understand, because we have not understood nature, we have not understood soil, we have not understood human beings, we have not understood a drosophila for that matter, the most used, biotechnology.
The fruit
Yeah.
fly.
Biotech.
Yeah, I remember always in science classes, it was tested on a fruit fly because of the generations and it does it very, very fast. So we test everything on them. But I never quite understood exactly. I felt rather sorry for the fruit fly.
Exactly. So we have not understood it. So why do we want to quantify the benefits rather than say what costs are we cutting? What losses are we cutting rather than costs, right?
Well, it comes back to this idea that we talk about in energy a lot, which is externalities, and the fact that the way our economic system works doesn't deal with negative externalities. It basically just deals with the financial costs. So there is, as you say, perhaps a need for a change in thinking. Instead of looking at what the financial cost benefit is and saying, what are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to protect?
Yeah, but I don't think that paradigm shift will happen in terms of money, people not quantifying things monetarily. My only point is monetarily quantify the losses you're cutting rather than you have asking the question of how much are we earning from doing this. You will definitely earn. We can put a number to that as well. But the losses that we are cutting is going to ensure that we never incur the losses going forward, because the loss is not going to be static, it's going to grow exponentially, right? If you don't attend to the problem now or the state of soils now, the loss is going to grow exponentially. So you can project the loss, what it's going to be like if it was business usual. You tend to the soils business usual and see what happens. There was a very controversial statement made by one of the FAO people. It was spoken at a conference. I don't think it was proven. They said there is only 60 harvests left. Okay. When somebody spoke about it, people said that, how do you know there is only 60 harvests left? Or how do you know there is only 60 years of farming left? My point is, we're able to put a number to it. Like Sadhguru keeps saying, how does it matter if it's 60 or 100 or 120? The fact that you can give a deadline to the date when you stop farming is alarming enough, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's something that the wider population are just not aware of, because it's not part of the mainstream conversation. And certainly for people in urban areas, it's not something they think about. They don't think about the realities of what's happening on the ground. I remember hearing a few years ago that the UK has the most degraded land in Europe. And I was really shocked, because you go out into the English countryside and it's green and it's lush and you see farms, and it doesn't occur to you that the land is degraded and not healthy because of the way that it's being farmed. And I think that's a message that's really necessary to get out there. And I suppose that's part of why you're pushing for agriculture to be a priority at the COP.
Yeah, the green countryside in UK, or a whole lot of green countryside you see in tropical countries, are green deserts, because you're growing the same crop over and over again. You're not able to rotate, and if you rotate, you don't know. Like, the point is, there is an initial investment required to have the behavior change happen. Even a simple behavior change of just doing cover crop between crops, it requires money, and you need to put in that money for the farmers to be able to do it. When I say you, a government or a non-profit or any other financial mechanism, like there is one particular investment firm in America who have come up with a fund for ocean restoration. It's called the Aloha Fund. The way the fund is designed is, it's just that it's an impact fund. Okay, I'm just kind of sharing what are the ways through which you can support farmers and ecological activities. It need not be always from the governments, there are innovative ways also. So the fund picks up various businesses to invest in, and there are people who invest through the particular fund, Aloha Fund, right? And whatever profit is realized, the customers who's investing it, the investors get part of it, but there is a small percentage that goes to restoration, ocean restoration. That's an impact fund.
Oh, that's brilliant, because people are still getting their money back and it's only a percentage of profit that gets returned. So everybody benefits.
Exactly. So the governments can actually think a little bit innovatively. They can maybe, have different types of taxes. Like we have a lot of taxes that go along with food in India whenever we buy various things. For education, girl child education, food and girl child education are not related, but the government is levying the tax so that every good that you produce is feeding money to that fund which supports girls to go to school, right? So there are various ways, innovative ways of designing taxation or investments or things like that. Financial instruments can be designed. It's and it doesn't take much for financial investors or bankers to come up with these designs. The point is, if you really want to solve for it, you'll be able to find these ways to get the money.
And I suppose that's what we want to see this November.
Yep, yep, yep.
It sounds really sensible. What do you think the challenges are to getting agriculture to be a priority within the climate negotiations? Why isn't it already there?
I think climate negotiations, when they started, they were really rosy. The commitments made at Paris COP, $100 billion year on year towards, both mitigation and adaptation.
And we know that's a drop in the ocean because the need is in the trillions.
Yeah, and it's never been met. Not. I don't think a year, even in 1 year since then, we have seen $100 billion come in that form. So people are. I think it's come to a place where people want to save themselves. They're not looking at the bigger picture. What is it for me as a nation, as an island nation? What is it for me as a country which is so agrarian rich? Like half the population is agrarian, or 90% of the population is agrarian. So the minute it becomes like that, it becomes difficult to bring in consensus. I feel the politics of it as taken over the mandate of what COPs intended to be to begin with. At least the climate COP has become extremely, extremely political, and there's quite a bit of disappointment, honestly, in across the world, not just a few countries, right? And we were part of some of the discussions at the Bonn meeting that happens in preparation to COP this year, and it was fascinating to know that climate finance as a word is yet to be defined.
Well, that's not very helpful. I do understand that it's a challenge because it's been defined as something so all encompassing that it's kind of meaningless and it gets interpreted different ways. And some people think climate finance should be public money. Some people think it should include private money. Some people think it should include in-country investments. And so I get that without a clear definition, it can be all things to all people and nothing if you don't want it to be. So is that one of the things we need to do to get a clearer definition of what climate finance is?
Clear definition, and I think farmers should have a stronger say here. Like as a stakeholder, farmers have not had such great representation at COPs until I think Glasgow, you know, and even at Glasgow, soil was not mentioned in any of the climate, declarations, right? So at Egypt, we had the FAST system set up by FAO, Food and Agriculture Systems for Transformation, right? Initiative, and there was a Agri-Food Systems Declaration last year. So I think farmers should ask very firmly what they need to be able to be climate resilient, because that's what will matter to them, not so much to do with water quality and others. For their fields to be resilient, they need to be supported. And there is a good movement in the direction, because world farmer organizations, unions like this, have a vertical that looks at regenerative agriculture practices. So the direction, the conversation has shifted. No more people ask, does organic farming make sense? Does regenerative agriculture make sense? That's no more the question. Everybody says it makes sense. But you need lot more farmers doing it. Like the adaptation has to happen at a much quicker pace, like a lot more in a lot shorter time. And therefore, for them to be able to do that, they need to voice. And few of us who are working on subjects like soil and others should be able to put the word very firmly on the table for on behalf of farmers, saying that what is needed for them to be able to move in the direction of making soils a carbon sink, and what kind of finance is needed. And I think asking, we need to consistently ask. I think then the largest secretariat and the government, the parties will yield.
I think that's an incredibly powerful message. The idea that there is an option which is really strong and powerful and functional for both adaptation and mitigation because of the sequestration in soil. And it's a solution that speaks directly to the needs of the people most affected by climate change, by the people who have most power over changing the way in which we treat soil. And actually, as you say, it's a question of bringing people's voices together and getting the world as a whole to understand the opportunity that's here and the importance of protecting what we already have in order to maintain not just the resilience of land and carbon and climate, but also of society and global food systems and stability. So, I mean, yeah, I wish you the best. I hope it goes very, very well. Do please come back and tell us how it all happened. And thank you, Praveena, so much for sparing the time to talk to us today.
Thank you, Felicia. Thank you so much.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us today, and I hope you found the conversation as fascinating as I did. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter and to the podcast on your preferred platform, and do follow us on LinkedIn.